your clients, which means you need to know your clients. And then finally, if it's a static type of advertising, it needs to be pre-approved, and interactive advertising needs to be post-reviewed. So there's no rules, new rules or regulations in financial services. The challenge has been for firms to figure out how to apply all those rules and regulations to social media. And I'm beginning to see that firms have gone from a very conservative point of view of every single thing is going to be pre-approved and controlled and measured, to more of an evolution that some things will be pre-approved and some things will be post-approved, but all of it will be retained and made e-discoverable at a later date.
Jamie, are there any parallels to the way email is reviewed, compiled, analyzed? When you go out and talk to your clients from that standpoint, are they treating it in a similar way, or is it its own animal?
Well, I think your analogy is great, and there are many parallels. I'd like to talk about a few of them in a second. But to your immediate question, I don't think clients are thinking about it in an analogous way.
Okay.
To Joanna's point, it would be healthy to do so because there are these similarities. And the reason I say that is that, to clients, email is internal communication mostly. So the way you would analyze that would a lot be around compliance and are people saying things they shouldn't, et cetera. Now you've got this public thing that, to Joanna's point, needs to be pre-approved. So I see them thinking about the questions they should be asking through analytics as being quite different. I guess the other comment is I don't think they're doing as much analytics on their social media because that is such a embryonic phenomenon.
It's still so early that, right.
And obviously now that you can tweet, once you get beyond those barriers, now the question is, well, who should be tweeting? What should we be tweeting? How can we get return on investment if we're going to start doing this? It's a cost center, but how can it also be a revenue driver?
So just when you look at the landscape, and Joanna, I'll start with you on this. When you look at the landscape of all the different social media platforms that are out there, it seems like there's a new one each week, but there are some that seem to immediately lend themselves to business and finance and the acquisition of customers more so than others. So LinkedIn versus Twitter, for example. When you work with a firm, are they looking for the total solution across all platforms, or are they more comfortable with one versus the other? What seems to be the current thinking as far as the platforms go?
That's a great question, because that's the first thing I asked.
Thank you, I worked hard on that one.
And I've been really surprised by the answers. I just assumed that anyone in financial services would lead off with LinkedIn, because it seems like a logical way to start in social media, because you have your connections and there's people changing jobs and retiring, and you see all this activity. It seems like a logical thing for a financial advisor. However, what we're also seeing is Facebook might be the place where they start. And the reason is, if you, in financial services, specifically in insurance is sold through a life event. So if you're familiar with someone, whether they're getting engaged or getting married or having babies and buying houses and buying cars, or maybe their folks are going into retirement homes, those life events stir up a conversation that a producer might want to have. And then in terms of Twitter, there's the little discomfort with Twitter, because people typically don't know how to use it at first. So they tend to use it to measure sentiment and to broadcast. They broadcast like a press release, and then gradually begin to understand that it's a dialogue.
Right. So, Eric, I read your slide share this morning preparing for the conference, and it looks like you had taken two teams of advisors, and some of them tended to use Facebook more, some of them tended to use Twitter or LinkedIn more, and you were trying to figure out what makes one group try one versus the other, and why are the success rates different. Could you talk a little bit about the difference in platforms and how you've seen them used within Robert W. Baird?
Sure. Which platform you decide to use or which one's going to work better for you has a lot to do with what type of business you have, what type of advisor you are, what your practice is like, what type of marketing strategy you have. So, what we found with Twitter is that the teams that have done well with Twitter, one of our teams, for example, it's our highest producing team, does a weekly radio show in the DC area every week. And they just talk about, the financial topics that are relevant at the time. And and they use Twitter for not only promoting that show, but a lot of follow-up to that show. So, content, referring people to and talking about content that may be complementary to the subject matter of the show that week. They use it to direct people. They produce a lot of thought leadership, so they're calling attention to that, and so that's the type of activity they found success with. With Facebook, the people we're having a little bit more of a struggle with Facebook actually than we are with Twitter, in terms of getting advisors to adopt it. But the teams that we're pushing toward Facebook are those that sort of nurture more of a family practice, if you will. That a lot of their business is centered around a smaller client group, but more sort of personal involvement with those clients and long-term relationships. So they really, they can sort of build up a Facebook community around a type of business relationship that is more nurturing and through life stages. Rather where Twitter is more of a kind of a real-time, a quick hit sort of interaction. So, at least right now.
I've heard people discuss Facebook as a 24/7 kitchen table, so they can interact with their clients when their clients' children have gone to bed, and now they're on Facebook. So it allows them to reach a larger geographic area.
And it's a little bit more personal, I suppose, than LinkedIn, if they're using it in that way. So Jamie, as far as the platforms are concerned, which one is the easiest to measure things like engagement? And some of the more touchy-feely, I know there are numbers attached to them, but guys like me who are in the business, it's only AUM, assets under management. We don't really care about things like engagement. What do you mean I'm engaged? I'm married to it.
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
But that's the kind of thing that actually will yield results if you measure it correctly. So which platform allows you to get in there and do your job and say to a client firm, hey, your guys are really doing well here, but here not so much?
That's a great question. And it's a great setup because I couldn't agree with you more. The metrics that matter are not the engagement metrics. The metrics that matter are not the number of followers, the number of likes. You cannot deposit any of that into the bank.
They're good for the ego, but they're not necessarily business. They're not generating business necessarily.
Exactly. And yet, there is a line, there's a causal chain, if you will, from good engagements to your sales funnel, for example, or good engagements to thought leadership, which leads to other advantages. So the question is, this is your question, how do you measure what matters, and is there a difference among platforms? I actually don't believe there is a significant difference among platforms. They're all imperfect. And the biggest imperfection really is that no provider has done a very good job of allowing you to take what Eric was talking about, which is your business model, your offline key metrics, as in new leads, lead conversion, all that kind of stuff. That needs to be somehow linked back to something you did online that generated those leads. And then you say, well, what was my yield on those leads? Were they good leads? And so it's really about the metrics online being linked to the offline results that actually matter. And while it's not rocket science, it's not something that I'm seeing providers doing very well.
It always comes back to the leads, though.
Yeah.
Right.
It comes back to leads. There's a few other things, like, for example, a few clients I've noticed are measuring now retention. And they'll notice that retention is better if there's an online engagement. Like, for example, if you've raised your hand and told all your friends that you like your financial advisor on Facebook, and then your friends maybe sign up, and there's kind of a community that, yeah, we really like Josh Brown.
Right. So I want to get a little bit into the compliance aspect. We haven't touched on it yet. I've read the FINRA notice to members from 2010, and then the follow-up and the SEC. But everything that the regulators seem to have put out are broad kind of paint strokes. There's nothing very, very specific. It's not like reading the Securities Act of 1933, where literally everything is laid out for you. And you get the sense that there's a little bit of we're not 100% sure yet what will constitute a violation, but we'll know it when we see it. And I think that's what's kind of held back a lot of the larger and more established firms, because if a small firm makes a mistake, it's a fine and it's a blemish and it's obviously a pain in the neck and a legal fee, et cetera. If a large firm makes a mistake with a sales force of 30,000 people all committing that mistake en masse, it's a little bit of a different story. So, Eric, you work with, I guess, a mid-sized firm would be the right way to put it. How hard is it to, as someone that's heading up the social media effort, how hard is it to gauge, the slippery slope aspect of it and the fact that it's not a sniper type approach from the regulators, but it's pretty broad still?
I think, if you read a lot of the guidance that FINRA has put out and then a lot of the analysis that's been done on that guidance, the way we've approached it is we've really focused on controlling what we can control, which is put a product in place that can monitor and archive automatically, have a policy, have a documented, stated policy that is not only maintained by our compliance department, but that's shared with everybody, have training and education in place and require it of your financial advisors, and then just pay attention to all the other rules that they've already put in place around advertising communication. So I think, that's our position right now is that's about all we can do. And FINRA seems to be loosening up a little bit in terms of, seems.
Don't jinx it.
In terms of, what they're willing to, kind of let pass without pre-review and what they're not. But, for us, the keys are around having that policy and training and education. And training and education for us is the key because that's what's going to prevent, somebody from making mistakes and things like that. So, or mitigate that risk to the greatest extent, at least.
So Jamie, how large does the compliance aspect loom when firms are figuring out their strategy? It's almost like marketing and compliance have to work seamlessly in order to bring something out and allow the guys in the boardroom to actually use it.
Well, nothing really happens until the firm collaborates
Right.
and that everybody sits at the table. And in fact, that's what I really do all day. I gather together the people from risk and governance, legal, compliance, at the same table as marketing, IT, security, HR. I mean, it's really, there's 27 to 30 people, departments involved, all the lines of business. So
Have they agreed on a definition of the word tweet yet?
no, I mean, it depends on the risk tolerance of the firm and where the strength in the firm is.
Right.
Because going back to FINRA and the SEC, it always goes back to the same issue, the spirit of the law of protecting the investor. So when you make these decisions, if you see it through those lenses, because the regulators are never going to be so specific, especially around social media, they can get themselves into trouble because it's changing so quickly. So they hearken back to what's your risk tolerance, what are your policies, and it goes the most smoothly when all those people I mentioned are involved right from the beginning. Because if they're not, if it starts as a marketing initiative, at some point they're going to hit the compliance wall. So it's better to get compliance at the table right at the beginning and begin to speak that same language. That way the policy developed is embraced by the whole firm.
So how important do you think it will be for the large firms like Merrill Lynch and Wells Fargo? And they've got really big sales forces, yet they've got a consistent, or at least they try to have a consistent firm message, whether it's on the economy or the right way to allocate capital for investors or a viewpoint on a certain sector of the market in terms of their research. How important is it for each individual employee at, let's say, a Merrill Lynch to stay on message with the mothership? Because obviously we're human beings, we have opinions, we work at firms, we don't always agree with everything that comes from corporate. So do you think that that is going to be one of the biggest struggles for the large firms to get into this game? And Joanna, I'll start with you because you work with some of the larger firms.
Yeah, it's not as much of an issue as you think because there are technology and there are tools that allow, for example, firms to develop a library of content. So typically the corporate communications department might put together content because we know that content is shared like 3.5 times as often as personal updates. So those corporate communications or centralized marketing departments will put together content that they think is appropriate for their reps. And then there's technology in place that you can then allow those representatives to select pre-approved content and share that.
Do you
with
think
their
that the
customers.
potential audience on Twitter is interested in receiving tweets coming from a pre-approved library of content?
Absolutely.
Okay.
They're interested in
If it's informative, in other words?
Absolutely. If you have children and you're thinking about 529 plans, if you have if you're planning for taxes, I mean, it has to be useful. You can't sell, you can't pitch
You
products.
can't
that's for
say
sure.
it's a beautiful day at Morgan Stanley.
But-
It's not going to
But
get a
you
lot
know,
of traffic.
every once in a while you should, because
Okay.
you are a person, right?
Sure,
So if you're
sure.
just constantly banging away at, save for retirement and don't go to Starbucks because you'll be able to save $10 a day. I mean, who wants to hear it all the time? But if you have really useful content that you're sharing, and the content really needs to be versioned by the audience. So if there's a rep that has a lot of people with young children, they would have a different message than people who are at the point of retirement.
Eric, what kind of content do you see being shared by your test groups and the early adopters at your firm?
A lot of it is around financial topics, obviously, but so I mentioned the group that has the radio show, so complementary content that follows up what was discussed during that period. One of the other teams actually takes a more personal approach, which we really, really promote. The title of the session, Authenticity, that's a big deal for us. And in this pilot we're running, we are suggesting content and producing some suggested content that advisors can select from, but we're not requiring them to do anything. This is completely hands-off. They are able to tweet whatever they want. That's why we kept it so small, because we have to manage that. But the point is, Joanna's right, you need to give them some stuff, right? Because they're not going to just all of a sudden create all this content on their own. Mm-hmm. But we feel it's important that they bake in some personality with it, some reflection of who they are and the type of business that they do. They've been selected as the advisor of the people they work with, not because they work for Baird. We'd like to think that, but they've selected that advisor because they've formed personal connections with these people. And that's what social media is all about. Brands don't really make meaningful connections. People do. So we like to see a balance of some of the personal stuff and the, sort of the more cleansed financial, guidance and things like that. So we really encourage a balance, and we've actually seen a lot more engagement, however you want to define that, but a lot more interaction around some of the more personal things that are shared.
And Jamie, do you find that people that are a little bit more personal, even if they're working within the confines of pre-approved content or somewhat pre-approved content, do you find that the people that find a personal way to actually communicate it are getting more traction? And can you give us some examples?
Definitely. So there are actually two cases that I can briefly give as an example. One is in the larger advisor or even brokerage space. Now that's the space where, to your point, you have a lot of content already, expert content, white papers, videos, appearances, whatever. So at that point, the question is, how do I actually deliver to more eyeballs that content while maintaining authenticity? And one of the better practices that I've seen there is, first of all, intersperse it with statements that are personal and that are well in compliance, or maybe not even related, quite frankly, to any sort of a investment recommendation. And the second is, you can click that pre-approved content, but you can add your comment, and again, within compliant standards, but add your personality that will resonate more with your audience. So that's kind of the large firm example that I would give.
And just to interject something, if you're doing that, then you probably need tools and lexicons to be able to identify. If you're allowing your reps to tweet with their own voice, you do want to make sure that they're not using words like guarantee, prices increase. They could say that the Giants are guaranteed to win the Super Bowl, but not.
But so a lot of those
Not the
things
guaranteed
are
return.
holdovers, though, from any other kind of advertising.
Exactly.
It's not like a broker can say, I guarantee this investment over the phone, and then not tweet it. A lot of this stuff is the same across any medium that you're going to use. The difference is you run a mutual fund ad or an ad for a CD yielding whatever, and you do that in, let's say, Barron's, there's enough space on the page where you can include a 500-word disclaimer in small print. You can't do that with 140 characters. Yeah. So what do you guys think is how do you split the difference if you're trying to monitor this and you're trying to let people talk enough about products but not to the point where they're endorsing products?
Well, I mean, depending on the conservative nature of your firm,
Right.
you know, any kind of product description or recommendation isn't, you know, it has to be pre-approved. It has to be suitable for the person which you're giving it. So on social media, so that's one. An email is one thing, but if you're doing social media where there's thousands of people who are following you, and you make a product recommendation that could go anywhere, so that you'd be really cautious to do that sort of thing. What we're seeing firms do is do content that might be non-controversial, that enhances their brand, that's useful. And they take those conversations about product recommendations offline, where they can have conversations on the phone or by email.
Right.
I think that's where the training and education comes in too. That's why it's so important, because you can give them context, you know, for understanding, you know, that from a communication standpoint, this isn't very different from a content standpoint from what you've been doing, you know, forever.
Right.
But you know, you need to be very, very careful about, you know, this isn't a license to just do whatever you want.
And to your
The rules are still the rules, and that's why we think it's so. The training and education is huge because you have to manage behavior.
And to your earlier point, I converse with people from FINRA, and they all say the same thing, that none of the firms are asking them if the content is different, if they can send content that's new and different. The firms recognize that the content restrictions and the standards are the same. The firms are just concerned about the technology and how to capture it and how to monitor and how to keep adherent to the brand.
Right. So it seems to me that the biggest difference between, I suppose, Wall Street 1.0 advertising and public appearances, where it's a guy on TV reeling off stock picks like a machine gun, and social media, where the guys that have built up big followings are not on there touting stocks or giving broad-based financial advice like everyone buy this. Those don't seem to be the most influential people on social media. The people that seem to be the most influential are the people who are sharing news, are the people who are linking to others, and are the people that are saying, hey, this just happened and I'm not sure what it means, but I think it's something we should all pay attention to. And it's kind of the way that I've tried to build my own brand. Yeah. Is that the kind of thing that is plain vanilla and germane enough for large firms, but also effective? I mean, is that the kind of thing that people should be trained to do with social media?
I think so. I think communities coalesce. I mean, regardless of the size of your organization, and this is business or personal, communities coalesce around like interests or shared sense of value. And if they feel like they're being sold to, there's no value in that. You know, I can get that anywhere else. But if they feel like you are sharing information that enhances their life somehow, or you know, provides them some value, that's what drives the community, and that's what gets people, that's what establishes your credibility.
Right.
And in social media, credibility in terms of developing a following and have it being a meaningful one is everything. So.
And Jamie, you feel the same as far as that's concerned. Who do you see getting the most traction? What types of sharers and what exactly are they doing that's helping them get a leg up on other people who are failing at this?
Well, I think if I were to answer that question honestly, the people who impress me most are, aside from yourself,
of course. Understood.
Not financial advisors.
Right.
And yet, I think the financial advisor can learn a lot from folks who have been unshackled for years and are doing this well.
So what, journalists, traders?
Well, it depends a lot on the business model. But for example, so I'm in the consulting space, which in some ways has some similarities, although many differences. And there are a lot of folks who have become professional heroes to me who, the reason they're so influential is because they're opinionated, they're informed, and they're engaging. So even though I'm maybe 30 years behind them in their career, they'll answer a question from me, or they'll tell me why my tweet was wrong. And so those dialogues, I mean, one of the ROI that I think I and many knowledge workers can get from social media is actually just a network of thought leaders that have some respect for you. And then they invite you to speak or they refer you to clients.
But you know, we are actually beginning to see our real ROI. I would like to share, maybe I could share a couple of stories.
Please.
We work with a very large wirehouse that was doing a pilot. And very conservative, they started with 15 people, and they started with their very top producers who didn't want to use social media. Thought it was
They don't,
okay.
they don't need to, by
They don't-
definition.
Right, they don't
Right.
need to. It's a time suck. I hate this. My kids do this. Name it.
One of my-
Anyway, they were forced to do it, and they were trained and handheld and all this. So they get on LinkedIn. Just LinkedIn, 15 people on LinkedIn. So one person actually noticed that on their LinkedIn site that a connection had retired. So she picked up the phone and she called the person, congratulating them, and discovered that the person was not working with a financial advisor. She had like $1.5 million of 401k, securities, annuities, cash in the bank. She wound up getting a $2.75 million new account because she picked up the phone, because it was identified to her that someone had
So
just retired.
it's an online interaction that turns into an offline
Exactly.
interaction because somebody's paying attention.
They're paying attention.
Right.
Other people, like I recently, you probably got that email from LinkedIn, 175 of your connections changed jobs this year. Well, that becomes, 175 people, if I was a registered representative, would be an opportunity for rollovers. I would spend the whole month reaching out to all those people. So that's what we're beginning to see. Another, my favorite story is a fellow, again, really resistant to using social media, very senior, was a global traveler, had gone all over the world. And he was back in New York, and he went on LinkedIn. Within 6 months, he was able to reconnect with 500 people he had lost track of, who were in Vienna and Hong Kong and Chiang Mai, and be able to reach out to those people he had just lost over time. So he's beginning to reestablish relationships, and it's easy. This is easy stuff.
So what do you think the danger is? And I'm pretty certain this will happen at some point. What do you think the danger is somebody at a mid-sized or a large firm being so good at this that their message starts to transcend what the firm is putting out? Besides some of the people now, because it's still so early, even if it's in a year from now, isn't there a danger that a firm gives somebody the ability to build their brand, and all of a sudden their brand is getting more attention and is more valuable in social media speak than the firms themselves? Jamie, what are the possibilities of that?
Big risk, absolutely. Depends on the industry. Nicholas Kristof may be doing that to the New York Times as we speak.
Well, it's happening with journalists. So you have to look. You see athletes lose a game and then go into the locker room and tweet that the coach screwed up.
Exactly.
You have to assume at a certain point a firm is going to make a really big call. The call is going to go wrong, and a guy that's in the trenches at that firm is going to say, this is the worst semiconductor analyst on earth, or whatever the case may be. You have to assume that these things ultimately will happen. The only reason they haven't happened yet is because no one's tweeting at the mid to large size firms. You could fit all the people tweeting probably in this room. But what is the danger of that happening? Joanna, what do you think would be the fallout from that, and how can firms protect themselves?
Well, I think it goes back to training, education, and policies. I think we need to be crystal clear with the people who are using social networks, what's allowed, what's not allowed, and to constantly be watching and updating and making sure that...
So you think it can be stopped in its tracks?
I think that we can try to. I think that there's going to be mistakes, and I think that firms that had those experiences will wind up shutting social media down for a while because they'll be so shocked by it.
So it's not going to be a smooth glide path to 100,000 advisors tweeting?
I hope it is.
Right.
But we're just people, and we are fallible, and we're going to make mistakes. I mean, you can put technology in place to try to prevent mistakes as much as possible. Just like, nowadays you don't really get a lot of spam at the office. You're not allowed to go to gambling sites. A lot of our firms, before we work with them, they're not allowed to go to Facebook, LinkedIn, or Twitter. So there's always been technology solutions to prevent bad things from happening.
Okay.
So
and Eric, do you feel the same, or is it a bigger risk than I'm stating, or a smaller risk?
I think, I don't know if it's, I think you've hit it, you've got it about right. I think, this isn't about risk avoidance. Risk avoidance would be to not do it, right? So you can just avoid it entirely. This is risk mitigation. And that's where, what I talked about earlier, control what you can control. And it's a risk, but in my view, it's a risk worth taking. And who knows, it might be a good problem to have.
Right.
I think, in terms of the training and the education, some of the messaging that needs to be there is you can't disparage the firm.
Right.
And that goes without saying, but you have to tell people that. Because in the heat of the moment, People, get emotional and then they
Yeah,
act on
that's
that. We
the
see it all the
problem.
time.
That's the thing with Twitter is it's a little bit Tourette'sy in
Right.
terms of the way people can. It's not like it's a premeditated, oh, I'm going to write this tweet and really go after my firm, but it's almost like, I can't believe they cut our payouts. Or,
Right,
I've been in the trenches long enough. It's very hard. I was a branch manager. It's very hard to keep negative sentiment quiet when people are unhappy with where they work, even if it's only a temporary thing.
Yeah,
I
I think
find-
it's a real risk, and it's going to happen. Somebody's
Sure.
going to do it.
Somebody's going to.
And,
I might do
and
it
I just
today.
think you need
I don't
to.
know.
well,
I don't want to do it. I don't
you
want
just
to be.
you need to be prepared. I think the training and the education is one thing, but as a marketing department or as a communications department who has a role in managing this, you have to have a plan to take on that or address that kind of risk when it does happen, and be proactive in expecting it, but then have a very sort of quick response plan for dealing with those kinds of things.
Jamie, what do you do if somebody becomes a rock star within their firm and all of a sudden the things they're saying starting to contradict, not even on purpose, but other guys within the firm say, hey, how come he's allowed to build his brand all over the place, and he's saying things that are different from what I'm telling my investors?
Absolutely. Well, it sounds to me like that becomes both a brand management issue as well as a risk management issue. So to take the risk management and picking up on what Eric has just said, one thing that we recommend clients do is to use numbers to quantify and rank those risks. So if you have 5 people whose tweets represent 90 to 95% of the brand messaging because of how many followers they have, and also just because of the names, these are people who are also on CNN, then you probably want to have a different policy about those people that's respectful. I mean, they're superstars, but also you're focusing.
Clear.
Yeah, you may want to clear every single tweet they said, not out of disrespect, but just because it's so important that it be on message. Whereas,
That sounds almost like it would become a personnel issue at that point.
well, right. I mean, how do you make that?
You say to someone, hey, you told me go out and tweet and build my brand,
Right, and now I'm a rock
and now you're
star.
telling me you have to pre-approve everything I say, goodbye. Is that a danger? Or not yet? Is it still too early?
It's hard to say. It's a hypothetical, and again, it's a risk-reward trade-off.
Sure.
I don't know who might do this. Mary Meeker or Henry Blodgett or someone. I mean, someone could go off, and you'd want to catch that tweet before it went live because that could become a story on CNN.
Right.
You're paying them a lot of money. I mean, your call, not mine. But I do think it's important to size the risk to brand and also compliance.
And just think through all the details. I've worked with firms where they have 25-point documents that people have to read and attest that they will follow in advance, and they spell out all these things in excruciating detail,
Okay.
including termination and what happens when they leave the firm. I mean, it's no different than any of the policies and procedures that firms have in place now. You just need to think about it from the point of view of the risk of social media, and make sure people understand real clearly what they're allowed to do and what they're not allowed to do.
Sure. And where do you guys stand on the individual having the firm's logo and maybe the name of the firm and their Twitter handle and maybe on their LinkedIn page and on their Facebook? And then who owns the right to? I saw your, Eric, for example, I saw the brokers in your program, their Twitter handles have R.W. Baird in them. So who has the right to that intellectual property? Heaven forbid they should ever leave. Whose followers are there? Because followers are an asset, not that they're the be-all, end-all, but that's your audience. That's who you're broadcasting to. So has any thought process been put in place for people to start thinking about that yet, or is it too early?
It's too early for us to have sort of a stated position on it.
Okay.
I think that, and the name of the individual in the company escapes me, but there's litigation right now around, I think it was an engineer or something like that who had developed a very large,
Yes.
Thank you. And so I don't know that that's going to set a precedent for anybody how that gets resolved, but I think it's going to, one, it's opened a lot of people's eyes to this, and it's industry agnostic. It doesn't really matter, but it's opened a lot of companies' eyes to this risk, and probably sparked some conversation internally around how to deal with it. For us, we have requested, or we're requiring that if someone is going to participate on Twitter, they do have to tie their handle to the brand. and you know, and then all the other training and education that comes along with it. But I think we still internally have some vetting to do to really figure out what does that transition process look like if that situation presents itself. So I think it's a little early to have any kind of sort of formal approach, at least with our firm it is. So that's kind of where we are right now with that.
How important is spontaneity to social media, Joanna?
Well, I'm a real enthusiastic social media user, so I tweet and post about absolutely everything all the time. In addition, I also am an employee at Actiance, and so I also have a system where I can go on and tweet out of a library that's been pre-prepared for me for my use. So I do both, and I get a lot of great reactions because people, you know, I tweet about compliance, I tweet about being at events, I tweet about, you know, movies I like. You know, so when people see, from me, when I'm talking about, say something about the SEC might have released, people go, oh, she's really interested in compliance, this is useful information. And then 3 tweets later, I'm talking about the movie I went to see. They're like, oh, this is Joanna Belby. This isn't just Belby at Actiance. Because my Twitter isn't Belby at Actiance, it's Belby. So I think that's really important to be authentic and transparent.
How much leeway are the firms going to give? And maybe this evolves over time, because I know it's pretty brand new. But how much leeway are the firms going to give for, let's say, a financial advisor who, during the week, he's all business, he's sharing links about the New York Times, et cetera, and then on the weekend, maybe he wants to do a movie review in the form of a Facebook update or, you know, a stream of tweets? Is that, I mean,
well, that's happening.
Compliance person would look at that and say, I don't know what to do with this.
Well,
you know.
Well, first of all, the regulators are only interested in business as such. They're not interested in personal communication.
So there'll be a line drawn between those two types of communiques from the same account.
It's hard to identify that bright white line, and we're working through those issues. I mean, how do you really?
Yeah.
But what we're finding already, there are certain clients that they allow their representatives to use pre-approved content, and then they allow their people to post their own personal content. And that content is collected and stored and it's monitored. Do you know what I mean? And then other firms don't allow any of that. It has to be pre-approved in advance and it's what the firm provides. So it's a continuum based on the risk tolerance.
Do you see that over time, or maybe you disagree, those pre-approved, the strictest policies will probably give way to something that's more like email where it's monitored?
Well, I think that you're always going to have pre-approved content for advertising-like materials. Though, you know, anything that is advertising needs to be pre-approved by a principal of the firm. I mean, that's not going to change.
Okay.
What is changing is the interactive portion of social media, whereas some firms monitor and pre-approve all those interactions, other firms do it after the fact. I think you'll see the differences is there, because that's where the gray is right now.
So Eric, if one of your reps tweets out, the Fed decision was 15 minutes ago and they're keeping interest rates at 0. And then someone comes along who's following, they don't know each other personally, they're not in a business relationship, and somebody says, hey, what do you think about Fed policy, 0% rates? Aren't they going to cause inflation or whatever? Does that person then have to say, I have to get my response pre-approved? Because I got to tell you, that's like a record scratch in social media. So how hard is it to, because that's not something where it's advice necessarily. That's almost a rep commenting on government policy. How do you decide, is that a pre-approvable event, or can the guy just kind of wing it and do a conspiracy theory on how the Fed is trying to unite the world? I mean, that could be a really tough thing, and you have to agree with me that that's going to become more and more as people get more followers.
Absolutely. You know, our position on that is, you know, we encourage that advisor to, you know, in a situation like that, to engage the conversation. And, you know, it's similar and different to a phone call, right? That same individual could pick up the phone and call this advisor and ask for that opinion.
The difference is it's public.
It's in a public forum. It doesn't have a viral component to it. But, you know, I keep going back to this training and education thing, and I don't mean to harp on it so much, but I think that's how important it is. It's getting advisors to understand what's appropriate to talk about. And if someone asks them to issue an opinion, as long as it's not religion or politics, because those are, you know, you wouldn't talk about this in any other forum. Why talk about them in social media? But you know, if someone's going to engage you and ask for your opinion or your analysis, it's okay to give that, I think. You know, and it's okay to give it not necessarily in a pre-reviewed pre-reviewed process.
You think
So-
you'll probably learn from those interactions more than anything
Absolutely.
in the early days?
Absolutely. And I think it adds to the authenticity of the conversation and of that community. And you know, if someone is part of your community on Twitter and Facebook, and they don't feel like they can come to you with a question and not get, not necessarily a real-time response, but you know, an immediate, you know, something within reason.
They might unfollow.
They might just,
and-
I'm not going to ask
right.
again. Yeah, and I'll go somewhere else for this. So-
Jamie, let's say I own a firm, and you know, I have a decent-sized sales force. We're not a huge firm. There's not going to be 27 people at the table. But what I really need is to just get started somehow, because my 5 or 6 top people are hawking me every day. I want to do Facebook. I want to do LinkedIn. So what do you say to that firm owner is the first 3 steps they should take?
Well, the compliance, as we've been talking about, and the risk management and the things that Joanna is expert at have to be the start, because what you don't want to do is just jump in and start doing, and you
And then having
haven't
to
limited your
undo.
downside.
Right.
So downside limitation would be number 1. But if, let's assume for a moment that that's been handled, not that it's easy, the sort of revenue strategy around this would be, okay, first of all, and Eric, you mentioned this, and this is, I think, where we're all on the same page. What's the business model?
Right.
Who are you as a firm? What's your positioning? Ultimately, what are those key brand values that make you different? As an example, some advisors position themselves as being there if you're scared of financial advisors. So, okay, well, I'm approachable, I do it differently, and then that, of course, relates to, hopefully, who you're trying to target. So in the example that I gave, which is a real example, actually, Facebook is a great place because you're trying to build
Is that where you would
trust.
tell people to start?
I would tell them to start with Facebook if there was that sort of unique reason to trust me, and unique reason, therefore, other people to say, hey, by the way, trust them because you might like them because. So I would go to that. Also, I mean, as we've talked about before, LinkedIn is almost a no-brainer, at least as a lead gen tool, just to listen. It's not so much about engagement, although that's good too, but if you do nothing else, just listen to the people you're connected with and notice when they're in a position where a call would be a good idea. So there's a very clear path to ROI there. Twitter, I think, is the biggest open question. You really have to go all in with a clear plan for how to use it. And you
It's
can waste a lot
actually
of
the
time.
only one of the 3 that I personally use.
Well, you use it well, but you
I
have
try,
to be all
but
in,
there
which
are
you
people, So there are people that use LinkedIn, and it's the only thing they'll use.
Right.
Right.
And some of that has to do with they're killing it. They know exactly what they're doing.
Yeah.
They live in a town. There's a corporation that's based in that town.
Exactly.
They link in with a few people, and then all of a sudden, 300 layoffs are announced, or heaven forbid, a merger, or whatever the case may be, and they're already there. They know exactly what they're doing, and they'll almost say, "Why would I waste any time?" And so, do you see tribes forming around each platform separately, even though it makes the most sense to be on all platforms? Do you think there'll be a scenario where tribes form around one platform or another, and maybe the firm says, "You know what? We're getting 2%, whatever the metric we use on this." 80% on that, why are we even spending the compliance money on this other thing? Joanna, is that the type of thing that you think evolves from this?
I don't know. I think there'll be a convergence. I'm not sure if 5 years from now there'll be the 3 networks. I think that each...
Are you making a prediction that they'll merge?
No, I just don't know. I mean, if
Live
you
that
told
dream,
if you told me 5 years ago I'd be doing this for a living, I would have told you you were crazy. So it's like I don't know where it's going to go in 5 years, but I know for myself, each audience is very different on the network, and how I speak on that network is very different. And I'm very conscious of that. So as financial advisors become more conversational and more familiar with social networks, they're going to realize that how they speak is going to be different on each network, and their messaging.
Do you think everyone can really do that, or it's going to be a
No.
select group that excels at it?
I think there'll be a small group who are really enthusiastic and innovative and push the envelope and will drive the compliance people crazy. But there are
Right.
going to be ones that are going to be successful at it because they're going to make mistakes and they're going to tumble and there's going to be an uncomfortable phone call. But they're the ones that are going to push the envelope and really engage. Do you know what I mean? And then people who will use it less so, just as a watching, listening kind of vehicle.
I think there's another component to this in terms of where advisors are going to see the most value or where a firm's going to see the most value in terms of these platforms, and that's personality. And that I think that with social media, you are predisposed in some regard to behave this way. You're predisposed to be social. You're predisposed to want to share things about your life or your business or things like that. So the first consideration there is this part of your DNA or not? And if it isn't, it's not going to work for you. And that's okay, though. I mean, if this is not how you behave, if it's of no interest to you, and you don't want to be out there, there's nothing wrong with that. That's just not the way you choose to do business. On the other hand, if it is part of your DNA, and you do, get all charged up about behaving this way and communicating this way, that's great. But then I think, the additional personality component feeds into what platform is going to be most effective for you. Are you sort of, more of a quick hitter, kind of more spontaneous, stream of consciousness type communication? Then maybe Twitter is the more appropriate platform.
You make it sound like it's a choice, and it probably is right now. However, all of the research shows that as the baby boomer generation and the greatest generation begin leaving financial assets to Gen X and Gen Y kids, none of them, I mean, it's literally like 9 out of 10 are leaving their dad's broker, their grandpa's financial guy.
Right.
And I have a theory, because I talk to a lot of investors every month and a lot of advisors every month, and one of the things that keeps coming up is if you're not online, you might as well not exist. To a 25-year-old, 28-year-old kid, goes on Google, he can't find you. Why would he keep you as the advisor once his dad has passed on? So I think to some extent, it's nice that right now we all have a choice whether or not to do it, but are you communicating to the firms and to the advisors that ultimately this is going to become a non-choice, so why not get your feet wet now?
And I think you're right. You're absolutely right. And I think my point is that I think the degree, at least within the next 5 to 10 years, the degree to which you as an advisor are going to have success with this is in part a function of, it's just part of who you are in terms of behaving this way. But you're right. There is sort of there's a tipping point there where you aren't going to have a choice. But how much are you going to embrace it as part of your business?
Joanna, would you work with a financial advisor that you Googled and they didn't exist?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
And the thing
Are you
to
getting
remember,
that message across as you deal with the larger firms?
Well, we're trying to talk to firms about the fact that $2.4 trillion of assets are under the control of Generation Y. The people who
That's
are
way too much. I've met them.
I don't know.
Not a good idea.
18 to 30, but these are the people who are just beginning to have relationships with financial advisors, beginning to set up retirements, beginning to develop wealth. And the statistics, about 20 years from now, something about half of all the personal wealth in America will be in the hands of these people.
Also scary.
Very scary. So, when we talk with firms, I talk with firms and they say, oh, well, we don't need to do this because our clients are in their 60s and 70s because we're a small boutique firm. So then I say, well, aren't their grandkids getting involved in the estate planning?
Right.
And they go, oh, yeah. So you got to really think about it in terms of being multi-generational. It's not just the client now, it's their son and then their son or daughter who's involved in asset management.
And for them, this stuff is a second language. They don't distinguish between magazine ad and online ad.
And you're not an innovator. You're a non-innovator. Who would want to work with a non-innovator?
Right.
Yeah, yuck. So I think it's critical that firms begin to get on board. And the thing that is good about being an early adopter is that when you make mistakes, people forgive your mistakes a little bit easier if you're late to the game.
Because we're all making mistakes.
We're all making mistakes together.
Jamie, judging by the nodding of your head, I assume you agree that
agree.
It's almost going to be a do or die proposition at some point.
Yes, and especially for certain demographics and segments, like you said, Generation Y in general, and especially a quote-unquote progressive or sort of multidimensional Generation Y who has wealth, But instead of wanting to just make it bigger, they want to feel good about themselves, or maybe they're genuinely altruistic. So they want to know that this advisor understands how to make wealth, but also how to give wealth away, how to do it smartly. So the philanthropy meets wealth meets financial advisory.
A little bit of reputation
Interesting.
management.
Exactly. And since that's a feel-good thing, you
Right.
definitely want to be on Facebook. You definitely want to be in places where people who are with that advisor can show to their friends that they're not, just with.
So guys,
Gordon,
before we
yeah,
get
go.
into a Q&A, I figured we'd just do a 40-minute PowerPoint. Hopefully everyone's comfortable. First of all, thank you guys. It was really terrific.
Pleasure.
That's great.
Is there a microphone person that walks around at this? That's you. All right. You guys can address questions to me or any of the panelists, anyone you want. Please.
Thank you for this. This is really helpful. This question is for Eric, but I'd love to hear the other two weigh in. So we talked about Facebook and Twitter, but you didn't talk at all about YouTube. And so many wealth management topics are amorphous, and I think that videos would be helpful for engaging clients and prospects. Mm-hmm. Eric, what are you seeing with regards, if anything, with regards to YouTube use, and just interested in thoughts from the panel?
Sure. I think that it's a huge network, and there's tons of good content out there. And we have a YouTube channel as a firm, and so the content we're putting out there, we do share. It becomes some of that shareable content or the content inventory that becomes available to advisors if they want to use it in not only their social media activities, but any other sort of more traditional marketing activities. I think from an advisor standpoint, what we've seen to this point is that it's a challenge for them to generate their own content.
Oh, sure.
So it's difficult in that regard because most of them don't have the resources to do that. So I think right now our emphasis really is around use what we have. It's all shareable. It's all embeddable. Put it in your emails. Put it in, shorten a link to it and throw it in a tweet. So that's our emphasis right now, and we really haven't explored too much on, sort of advisor channels because just from that content creation challenge. But it's also an opportunity to say, use these environments to mine them and see what's out there and might be relevant for your business and your clients, and don't be afraid to share that via whatever medium you're using. So,
I've seen some very innovative insurance companies using YouTube because they were trying to save costs on customer service. So typically when you have an event like a hurricane, you have to submit forms to claim insurance, and so all that information is available on their website. But this one firm found that if they create a short, like 2-minute video, how do I claim if my property is damaged by Hurricane Irene? That dramatically decreased their incoming phone calls, made it really easy for the firm to get the information they needed, and it saved them a lot of money, and they were very inexpensive. So what I'm seeing is that firms are using videos as a way to provide information, because a lot of people don't want to read anymore, but they will watch a video.
Picking up on Joanne's point about not wanting to read, that's the core of your point, is this is a great way to receive information. So I agree strongly. This is a fast-growing, high-potential market. You do get these issues that are business model specific around amateur video, which probably doesn't fit with a large brokerage's brand. I would also mention a couple other social media methods that we didn't talk about, blogs, Google+, although it seems to be fading, and just on that note, repurposing content. The more platforms you can put it on, there's a cost benefit. You get more from the same content.
Hi, just an editorial comment on the title of our program here in light of this pre-approved content going out. The social media industry, I think, has to be careful about the word authenticity, because with this pre-approved content, it's really maintaining fake authenticity. And I like your comment, Eric, about it's got to be in your DNA. Josh, you're made for Twitter.
Thank you.
Joanna,
my mom is very proud.
Right, but Joanna, you mentioned something before about how you need to be authentic and show your personal side. I think I started following you a few days ago. I'm launching my third social
Oh, no.
CRM app in the this time in the financial advisor space, and it'll be inbound content with a web-based compliance desk and social CRM for financial advisors. It's going to be called Port Fortune. It's not up yet, but we're on Twitter. But
So you can see me
when
tweeting about dresses, about the Grammy.
well, that's
With-
exactly
with the
that's exactly what I was just going to
SEC,
say. That's
you know?
that's exactly what I was just going to say. So I started following you because you had great industry information for me. Not unlike maybe the way an investor might want to follow an advisor, but then you started tweeting about the Grammys, and you just kind of lost me. Not that you're doing anything wrong, but it's you can't force these people to start putting out all this stuff, and you really got to find your audience, as I know you well know. But the question I had was, a few years ago, I really resonated with a comment that was put up by Forrester Research called technology populism. And that is to say that individuals, just like we're talking about right now, when individuals ascending over the very brands that they work for, that individuals could pick and choose the technologies and web services that they wanted to very easily. So Actiance, I would think, comes in at a very enterprise level.
Yes.
My web application will come in presumptively to the mid-level and very smaller level. And I wanted to know anybody's opinion on the panel of marketing to financial advisors with web-based services. Doesn't have to be compliance or CRM per se, but what's the level of ease or not ease? How do you reach all of those smaller tiered firms, the independent ensemble firms, as opposed to the big wirehouses that usually lead the way, and then startups like mine come in and take the bottom part of the market? Any comment on that?
I think that it's tough for smaller firms today because, at least from a financial services compliance standpoint, a lot of the solutions that are out there, or the ones that I've been exposed to at least, are enterprise type solutions. So they're expensive, relatively speaking.
Not
Not too expensive.
Not too
Not
expensive,
too
yes.
expensive.
They cost. Or there's a cost associated with them. Is that better? But they often, there's a certain resource need that comes along with them from an IT standpoint, and even from a compliance and marketing standpoint. So I think there's probably an opportunity there at the lower levels for some solution to fill some space there. But I think that communication via social media and the platforms that are available are moving so fast that I think in a heavily regulated industry, it's going to be difficult for software tools to keep up with that. And so, do I think that there are advisors out there that and perhaps even at my own firm that are using things that we're not ready for and we don't know about? I'm 100% sure of it. Absolutely. So I don't know. It's going to be a while before we get around that. So I think it's a very difficult challenge, I think, and there's space there to fill, if someone can come up with a way to do it.
And it's a large audience. I mean, if there's 4,800 FINRA regulated firms, probably, 80% of them have less than 10 people that work for them. So do the math. There's thousands of firms that there's a market for.
You reach them through their own. You need an evangelist. That's one of them, and that has some success with whatever you're selling into that channel, and you need them to be willing to talk about why they're successful. One of the problems with financial advisors and why they don't adopt things across the board very quickly is because, heaven forbid, something's working. The last thing you want is the guy across town doing the same thing you're doing. So all these little LinkedIn tricks, you very rarely hear about them in the media because people are figuring things out right now and they're not sharing because it's theirs. So I think that's probably something that continues in such a fractured industry.
Since so many of the big firms have not allowed their brokers to become involved in social, is that potentially going to be a loss of business for them? I mean, are you beginning to see these smaller firms that do allow that work with you, Actiance and others, and you're beginning to see some inroads on their bottom line, in the positive direction, because they are able to socially connect in a way that big firms can't?
I think that's a bigger trend that has a lot more. There's a lot more to that than social media. The breakaway broker who's leaving the nest and hanging out their own shingle, they won't tell you the main reason I'm doing this is so I can use Twitter. But I just think that the ability to have identical technology that the big firms offered them now, because technology is everywhere, is a driving force behind that. And so when you look at how much large firms have to pay advisors to stay, that number has climbed, obviously, if you look at the '09 deals, which are starting to roll off. So I think technology and the ability to be the face of your own firm now more than ever, because of things like Facebook and LinkedIn. You have to understand that 10 years ago, the firm ran commercials and that was good enough. But now nobody listens to the commercials anymore. And so there's a little bit more of an entrepreneurial spirit. And I think social media is part of it, but only a very small part of it. But losing reps certainly hurts the bottom line.
I have a different question too, sorry, if no one else.
Can I just, before you follow up,
Yeah.
Jamie, not to put you on the spot, but I'm curious if you have a perspective on that from a data
I
standpoint.
do, actually. I was about to raise my hand, but there's so much going on. Yes, so one of our clients that I'm allowed to mention is TD Ameritrade, and we do most of our work on their institutional line of business, which serves registered investment advisors, these breakaway brokers or other small to medium-sized, sometimes large, but independent, non-wirehouse brokers. And I couldn't agree more with Josh that there's something driving it around independence. You might actually say authenticity. You can be more authentic if you're independent, in many cases, not always. But the trade-off is they're losing a lot of access to, this is changing and getting better, but they are losing a lot of access to infrastructure, tools, and even just capabilities that they then have to build in-house, which is where a tool like yours could help, although also would need to be sort of low barrier to set up. But yeah, and also it's growing very fast. So for reasons that we talk about. Now, if you think about the larger firms, yeah, I mean, maybe that's a reason they need to kind of get more aggressive and be enabling authenticity without having to break away.
Well, when the big firms do get involved in social and they have so much more content at their disposal, what's going to happen to the mid-level firms, and what's the landscape going to look like then?
Good question. Niches.
I don't know that there are any, I don't know that there's any one answer to that, because the way that the industry is right now, it's actually become the mid-sized firms that have been able to swim upstream have thrived, like a Raymond James is a great example of that, and Ed Jones is now trying to do that. There are very few tier 3 firms even left. That stat where there's 4,000 something broker-dealers, a lot of those are 1- and 2-man shops, or they just serve institutions. There are almost no tier 3 firms left anymore, and that has nothing to do with social media. That's really a byproduct of the lines of business they were in are just not profitable at smaller scale. But so I think the opportunity for the wirehouse is to retain more of the people that say, okay, I put in my 20 years at Merrill, I don't listen to the analysts anymore, I know what I'm doing, and my clients would follow me through the gates of hell. Why am I sitting here? And especially if I can't be on Facebook. So I think the opportunity for the large firm is to stop losing those guys. Let those guys be a little bit more independent while still hewing to the rules of the firm. The opportunity for the small firm, like I work at an 18 to 20 man shop. We're satellited around the country because with technology we're able to do that. I work with TD. I have no technology disadvantage to the larger firms whatsoever anymore because everything is web-based. So the opportunity for us is probably not about retention because there are so few of us and we want to keep it that way. It's more about evening the playing field. I don't have a Super Bowl commercial budget, but there are things that I do have now that I did not have 5 years ago. And so the opportunity for a smaller firm is to try to leverage that and give themselves a shot at getting the same levels of assets as a broker at maybe Eric's firm or larger.
Does the panel see that a firm could benefit from a client type of community? I'm hearing in a lot of other panels that when people are part of the community, people are more likely to recommend your brand. And people are more likely to buy. In this case, they're more likely to invest or increase assets under management. Or maybe would these kind of peer-to-peer communities be public, or would they be private just for qualified
can talk to a very large firm that's located in the UK, has actually developed a community. It's a small business community, if you will, and it's facilitating the sharing of information and source and supplies in the community. So if I make, I'm a woodworker, I need varnish, you know, so it's a community of people that are producing things in an area, and they're beginning to make it global. And so they're not selling anything; they're just holding this community in their hands, you know, and it's reflecting back positively towards the bank.
I think I would say that there's absolutely value in peer-to-peer. I think that's really what social media, that's the foundation of it. It's the sharing and the learning from others and things like that. But you know, for financial firms, there's also a business model consideration there. Schwab has a peer-to-peer, like trader community. You have to be registered, and I think there's certain levels of activity that you need to have to be a member in that. But you know, they've found tremendous success with that group. But it's a more self-directed firm. So, you know, at a place like Baird, where, you know, we're very, very, very relationship driven and very, very focused on long-term, sort of life-term financial planning, I'd like to find a way to enable something like that. But at the same time, we really have to be careful about, you know, it's not like you don't want clients talking to each other, but, you know, there's been a lot of work put in, and you know, to developing people's clients' financial plans. And
I think that could be, I could see a nightmare scenario.
Yeah, absolutely.
Where one client says, how come I was only up 8% last year and you were up 15%?
Or you get around talking fees and things like that.
Or why is my broker, who's in the St. Louis office, telling me he likes biotechs and your broker is saying sell biotech? Yeah. I could see that actually as a nightmare on 15 levels. I think it'll probably never happen with brokerage firms where there's actual advice. The difference between that and Schwab people are self-directed. Yeah. It's no different than Twitter, or for them to be talking to each other is fewer risks to the firm, given that a lot of what they do is not advice-based. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Last month, the Massachusetts Securities Division came out with social media guidelines for the under $25 million threshold. I just wondered, do you see other states taking similar action or expressing a desire to take similar action?
You know, that was the first one I saw, actually. And so I've been watching. I haven't seen any ones yet. But what was interesting about Massachusetts, a lot of people might not understand that the SEC regulates investment advisors up to $100 million. And then below that, it's the individual states that regulate them. And so Massachusetts came out with some guidance, which was not exactly identical to FINRA and the SEC. And there were some fairly significant differences. And so it might begin to be something like the insurance industry, which is regulated by the states. You know, so you might have a situation for these smaller investment advisors where they're going to be regulated in different states slightly differently. But I've been watching, I haven't seen anything else. It's the first one.
All you.
So I have switched careers, so now I'm in financial advising and I work with high net worth individuals. And in my last life, I was in the wine industry and pretty active in social media. However, in finance, I felt like my company doesn't really support it, and have been stuck in this identity crisis of I have my Facebook, which is my personal life, and I'll be damned if I'm going to let anyone that I work with have access to that. And then LinkedIn is its own thing, and then Twitter is, okay, so I'm trying to figure out how to navigate that. Do you encounter that? Is that
You would be amazed how many people are on Twitter under aliases because of the foolishness of trying to restrict people from being people. I have thousands of people that I've seen that I know for a fact these people do something in the business, and some of them admit it, but they're under a handle like Sexy Trader 69 or whatever. Because, so you can't stop people from, they work in a profession, they have opinions about it, especially in the last 5 years with what we've seen, Wall Street almost tearing the country apart. Everyone has an opinion on whose fault it is and how bad it's going to get and is the worst over. There's no possible way on the planet to stop people from voicing their opinions. So what you're seeing, which I think is a huge mistake, is you're seeing a huge swath of people that would have no problem being normal people with their real avatar picture, their real name, come out and have a normal, civilized discussion that doesn't involve selling penny stocks. But because there's been such a guarded, hesitant approach by most of the firms, and hopefully that's changing. I know Joanna's working very hard to change that. So now you have this huge population of people that have essentially been driven underground. They're still saying what they want to say, but they can't say it as themselves. And that carries a lot of its own kind of frustrations. But what I will say is that civil discourse is the victim, because when people tweet anonymously or leave a comment on Facebook, that you can do it a little bit less anonymously, obviously. But when people do things under a fake name, they tend to be a little bit ruder. They tend to say things that are a little bit more firebomb-esque. So I don't think it's doing anyone any favors to have it be so strict that people can't even talk under their real name. And in fact, I think it's a detriment to probably the national conversation at large. And so for that reason, I think ultimately people are going to be allowed to do this as everyone gets more comfortable.
I think also, you said you didn't want, you don't want anybody at work having access to your personal Facebook profile. We're very upfront with our advisors saying, listen, we have to, if you're going to participate in this, we're going to archive it all, and that's just the way, that's what is required of us as a financial services organization, hence it's required of you. So think about that. If you want to participate in this, and if you want to do it on Facebook, and if there's content that you have on your personal profile that you don't want people exposed to, or expose it in your professional life, figure a way around it. Maintain two. I don't know. And behave one way in your business profile, behave another way in your personal one. I think there's ways around that where you can still be who you really are. But you have to make, as an advisor, you're going to have, if you want to leverage this and in this industry, you've got to make a decision about what level of exposure or insight into your personal existence do you want to offer.
And it depends on the policies of your firm.
Yeah.
I mean, we're seeing firms that are retaining archiving all. Well, on Facebook, you can't have two identities, at least you're not supposed to, according to the terms and conditions. You have one identity, which is your personal page, and then you can have a professional page that's linked to that. So our clients are across the gamut of whether they're archiving and capturing the business plus the professional, or just the professional. And there's guidance, there's rules and regulations that people who are using it need to follow according to their firm. But I know from my firm, my biggest adjustment, because this is what we do for a living, I had to become Facebook friends with my boss. And it's like really scary to be Facebook friends. And so I'm so transparent, if I'm goofing off and it's the middle of a business day, I'm goofing off, she sees it. So I just have made the decision, I'm a public person and whatever. It's like, I'm not going to change my behavior. I'm polite. I don't say anything rude or anything. But I do get caught every once in a while. If I'm on Twitter talking about, Starbucks or whatever, then people go, oh, look, Sarah, Joanna's not working. And then I'll get this tweet, get back to work. So I mean, but I'm really very uninteresting. I don't really have any secrets.
I disagree.
Thanks.
When I heard your question, I just had two words, Facebook page. Not your page, but your practice page, if it's allowed.
It's a business page,
Yeah.
like a
Yes,
professional page.
I guess I want to defend and say it's not like I have a trashy personal page.
What are you doing on the weekend?
But
Yeah,
it's,
right.
I'm just not totally,
Request
and
to be a friend.
I'm just not of that. I
But
guess I'm
ask
not
your
totally
firm-
open to the
But
fact
ask
that
your firm
everyone's-
first before you do anything.
Can
find
I
out what
also
the
say
policies
this? At a certain point, I've probably chased away more assets than I've raised on social media. I'm very upfront about that. At a certain point, do you want to do business with people that judge you because you stayed at this hotel in Florida versus that when you went away with your family? Or do you want to necessarily do business with people that have an issue with the fact that you went to a wine tasting on a Wednesday night and you tweeted at 11 o'clock at night, having the best time? Like, if there are people that look at that and say, well, I don't want you as my advisor,
Well-
my personal, and I've been through things to get clients in the last 12 years you wouldn't believe. So my personal opinion is, at a certain point, you have to say, if I'm not good enough for this person, then they're not good enough for me. So I think it's very hard to have a a private life and a personal life and then do this through social media and keep the two separate. And what you'll find is, if you're any good at social media, it'll become even more difficult. And so you're going to have to say to yourself, you know what, I've made my decision, I'm a public person, I'm going for it. And that's not for everyone. But that, I think, is the ultimate decision that everyone that has any kind of success at this in the social media realm is going to have to make.
Well, thank you.
I have a question. This is primarily for Joanna. With clients, we were talking about, certain people are Facebook people, LinkedIn people, Twitter people, like this sort of separation. But do you find yourself talking with clients much about how these cross over with each other, and how with new tools like Clout, where you're getting these online influence tools, how those will affect your clients online, and how it actually, it may change the importance of having a broad presence online?
Well, we have a tool that aggregates the three major social networking sites. So for the financial advisor, they're presented with a dashboard, and they can tweet and post and share to LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter in one place. And it's easy to use. And so that's what they do. So the people who are new to social media aren't necessarily understanding these are different networks because they're just starting. But I agree. But it does take time to begin to understand that. So the marketing department will understand it and corporate communications, but the actual user may not at first.
Do you think tools like Clout, online influencer tools, versus just the specific platforms, are going to become more influential for financial advisors to be aware of how all their activities combine onto one platform?
Well, I think it's whether it's Clout or whether other analytics. I mean, what we're trying to do is we do analytics on reach and engagement. So you can see in one place what your engagement is and how many people you're reaching and how many people are liking and reposting and tweeting and whatnot. And so, and then what is also important in an organization, how are you doing against your peer? So there's a gamification element that also can be incorporated at the enterprise level, because financial advisors are competitive by their very nature. So they're going to be competitive in social media as well. So there's tools. We have a tool that allows you to be able to say, all right, I'm Joanna Belby. I was the most active. I had the most engagement versus somebody else I work with, like Tom, who might have a good day or a bad day. And I will measure myself against a particular person and a group. And that gets me, that makes me spend an extra hour or so doing it because I want to beat the group.
I think if a financial advisor tells their client they have a 70 Clout ranking and they're a thought leader, the client's response is probably, great, how did my account do this quarter?
Right.
So let's kind of focus on what we're doing this for. And I think that the gamification and all that is fun for the people that are doing it, but means very little to the clients. I think what the clients are more interested in is, all right, so I'm working with an advisor who's this social media guy, great. What do I get out of that? Well, if it means that they have access to a lot of different events and research and meeting with really smart people and they're able to hear about things earlier than other people, so then maybe that's a benefit to the client. Again, there's no metric that I could come up with. I guess Cloud Score is the closest we get. But I don't think to the clients yet that stuff matters, even, at least not even close to how did their accounts do, am I on target for my retirement goals, et cetera. I think they're way more concerned with that as they should be.
If I could just say one thing about Clout, I mean, Clout in a way encapsulates everything that is embryonic or toddler phase of social media measurement. So what it does do well is measure the online influence and things like amplification. And yet you can measure amplification without Clout, just like your tool does. What companies really need, and this is going to evolve, I'm sure, is to take that amplification and say, well, who did it amplify to, and what did they do next, and what was our lead generation, and how good were those leads, and how did that flow through to new clients for the advisor because of that Clout? Because certainly there will be a correspondence. But your Clout could be very high just because you're Charlie Sheen, and I don't think you're going to get very many financial advisory prospects.
That's a good point.
Thanks. So you talked about the use of social media primarily as kind of different channels of doing some of the things that we can do today, right? So communicating with people, marketing to some extent, but do you see any new business models emerging? I mean, new products and services that can actually be enabled through the use of social media?
We're a very stodgy division within Wall Street. Financial advisory is not investment banking, it's not trading. We're typically slow adopters of almost everything. And a lot of that has to do with the compliance aspect, and some of it has to do with the fact that we're really seen as the responsible adult. We're not the rock star within the Wall Street complex. We're not the wizards, technology wizards. So I can't even think of anything offhand that would develop from an advisor using social media that would be a product that would benefit a client, unless it's kind of an enhanced communication that even we can't envision now in terms of how people get insights from their advisor. Maybe there's something to that, but for me, it's tough to even picture.
It's still, at the end of the day, it's still a relationship business.
Yeah.
And, I struggle right now. I agree to envision how you productize, the formation of a relationship that is at least, from a brokerage standpoint, is very, very personal. And so it's going to be more about how do you leverage what's been introduced to perhaps add value and enhance that relationship and extend it deeper, and expose yourself to the opportunity to develop, and expose yourself to an entry point at least to develop additional relationships. So, but who knows?
I'm curious if you have thoughts on other ways of using social media, perhaps bringing people together around a given financial goal, people within a given community that might be in the same peer group with kids the same age, trying to teach them about financial planning, and using the entity of the financial advisory practice to both empower people to manage their own finances better, and to use that also to nurture a feeling of connection to a practice that may be somewhat faceless.
I think the blogs are doing that now, probably more than. So I don't know if blogs are considered Web 1.0 or Web 2.0, but I think that where you're seeing that is on the blogs more than anything else. You're seeing a lot of guys that say, all right, this is my topic, this is what I know best, and they'll build a community just by virtue of the fact that, so the mainstream media has to be very broad by definition because they need the most amount of people to tune in for the model to work, and the model is to sell big ticket advertising. What's different between mainstream media and the blogs is that the blogs can be hyper specific, keying in on one topic. So there are blogs that key in on things like retirement and saving for college, etc. And I think and really all Twitter is a shorter version of a blog post. So I think you're seeing that happen on the blogs where somebody takes it upon themselves to be the expert on a specific topic, and a community develops around them, and they become a brand unto themselves that way. I mean, that's probably the best example that I could give.
I mean, I think there's ways to use social media, and I think you see a lot of brands doing this today around, they're sort of trying to curate a topic and drive some interest around their brand that's somehow relevant to that, or that topic is somehow relevant to their brand. So, you'll see, campaigns or what have you on Facebook and things like that. They're really, at the end of the day, extended to broaden your network and get you more likes, frankly. But at the same time, I think they can also introduce a concept, a financial concept, to a like group of people, whether it's at a certain life phase or they just have a certain financial interest. So I mean, you can take steps like that are just outside of the normal wall post or shares or things like that. But I think that whether blogs are 1.2 or 1.0 or 2.0, I don't think matters. I think, at least to this point, they're what I would consider to be evergreen social technologies. I mean, they're not, I think maybe, when Facebook and Twitter first started really becoming popular, a lot of the sentiment was that the blog is going, well, I think you've seen that's not the case, and in fact, they become even more popular. because they can be very powerful in terms of your ability to distribute content and establish
The
credibility.
scary thing is the people that are doing the best at that kind of building community or using social media tend to be the misanthropes. The world is coming to an end. The gold and guns guys, the gold and guns and stock up on, that's an interest group. I mean, they've always been there. They've been a little bit more vocal over the last few years given what's happened in the economy and the country, but they've done a really good job at using Twitter and Facebook and their own blogs, and they're selling gold. I mean, you go to their sites, it's gold bullion ads, it's coins. I mean, so it's definitely happening. It might not happen in the best ways, but there are people that are definitely doing that. And for some people, having a fallout shelter filled with gold is their retirement plan, and they think we'll all be retired very soon. So
I'd like to have a whole fallout shelter full of gold. I mean, I've seen some innovative work with insurance companies where, when you buy insurance, you want to really share the ethics of the person you're buying it from. So firms typically will support causes, not-for-profit causes, and create groups on Facebook where people can participate in like-minded things, whether it's for breast cancer or autism or whatever topic. And they're just holding the community and letting the community talk among each other, and it reflects positively back at that firm because you're sharing their same ethic.
Thank you. You kind of touched a little bit earlier on specifically marketing to Gen Y, and I was just wondering, are there specific things you guys do to get the younger generation interested in things like investing and finances? And because I find it's really challenging. They just don't really care so much, and they don't think they're too young to think about those things. And so I was wondering what you guys do to kind of squash that notion.
There's some pretty scary stats about Gen Y's opinion of the stock market, and a lot of my readers are Gen X and Gen Y. That's just who I tend to attract. I don't purposefully write toward that audience, but I just think they kind of get some of the things that I'm saying more so than other generations. The statistics on their opinions of the stock market and whether or not they would ever be in the stock market and these types of things you wouldn't believe them, but they're more than one study. And what you're talking about with Gen Y is the generation that when they were in high school, they were teenagers, their parents lost everything in .com stocks. So they watched that happen. 7 years later, they're in college, they come home for Thanksgiving, and there's a foreclosure notice tacked on the door. So to them, everything that has to do with investing and speculation and financial markets, it's not that they just don't trust it, it's that there are other things that they emphasize more than the boomers who, 1982 to 2000, the stock market went up 4 out of 5 days a week. You bought every dip. 1987, people talk about it like it was this major touch point. Look at a chart, it was resolved in 2 weeks. This generation now that's going to inherit all this wealth distrusts, despises the stock market, and in addition, the more things they can do on an automated basis without having to pick up a phone or go to a meeting or go visit a broker in a branch office, the better. That's their attitude. So that's the challenge for Wall Street, because Wall Street thinks that, the more times I touch the client, and in-person meetings are better than phone calls, and phone calls are better than emails. All of that is not the case with the new generation that's going to inherit this wealth. And in some cases, it's the opposite of what the traditional brokerage and advisory thought is. So I think it's going to be a challenge, but the one thing I will say about investor behavior is it only takes a 3 or 4 year bull market, and then all of a sudden all these negative attitudes about investing are out the window and everyone's a cowboy again. So there are cycles, and the best way to gauge that is average PE ratios. What are people willing to pay for $1 in earnings? Right now, PE ratios are historically very low because engagement and participation in the stock market is very low. When everyone gets excited again, you'll see that in the markets, and that'll trickle through to guys like us and big firms, small firms, et cetera, seeing Gen Y making inbound calls. Hey, I have this money. It's ready. I'm ready to try the stock market. So we're not quite there yet, but it doesn't take much for that to happen.
I think there's you make an important point too about, that point coming. And we were talking earlier about, a firm's, or advisor's, firm or advisor resistance to participating in social media. Would you do business with someone who doesn't exist, right? So when that point does come, I think, you need to make sure you're prepared for that, and you're going to be present. Right. Not just have a presence, but be present.
In other words, you can't start then.
Right. You need to be there and be engaged so that when they do come, you can have a conversation with them. Or they can find you at least.
You'll lose that whole opportunity.
Right.
Who wants to leave half of all the personal wealth on the table as an opportunity? No one.
And it doesn't mean that, social media is the golden ticket for that, but there's going to be influence there, and it's how this generation was raised, and it's how they communicate, or a big part of it at least. So,
fascinating segment, and to go back to the word authenticity, I mean, this group is going to see some people as authentically getting them, like apparently they feel about Josh. And then the question is, well, even if he's authentic, do I even believe that I need a financial advisor anymore? So one segment that I do think is still in play is those who will inherit large amounts of wealth that they will not feel comfortable managing at Vanguard. And so who are they going to turn to? It goes back to your point, Eric, of being ready to be authentically attracted to those groups.
Mm-hmm. That's happening now. There's a really, really high number of people who are dropping out once their parents pass away. They're moving away from traditional brokerage houses.
Yeah, I think it's less of a marketing approach than it is a relationship approach, but I think they sort of go hand in hand is in wealth transfer. And, regardless of what Gen Y's perceptions might be of the market or whether or not they need an advisor, you want to at least make sure that, those who are going to be passing on wealth are having conversations about it with the people that are going to be recipients of it, because as a firm then that at least gets you some exposure to what's going on now, and that's better than not being part of that conversation at all. So we spend a fair amount of time, from marketing, or at least an advisory communications standpoint, talking about make sure you're having these conversations with your clients, because this is now a family planning issue. It's not just a financial management issue. So.
I have a question. So wouldn't it make sense wouldn't it make sense just to hire an agency just to manage your social media from nuts and bolts offline as well? I mean, if you can't speak to Gen Y, why would you try if there's no,
because
I'm
you have no
40
shot
something,
if you do that.
right?
You have no shot at the A word.
Authenticity.
Because it's from a mile away. I mean, it used to be if you were a financial advisor and you were building up your practice, you would hire PR firms, and they would, every time you said something, they would blast it to their contacts, and maybe you'd get a mention in the Wall Street Journal or whatever. But the younger generations don't prize that as highly as the boomers did. I'll give you a great example. I have a column on Forbes, and I told my dad, hey, I got a column on Forbes. It's a Forbes blog. It's online. But he says print or web. So to him, being in Forbes is a big deal if it's in print. If it's online, it's online. But if you talk to someone that's 27 or 28 years old, they don't really care. A, that you write for Forbes. It's all right, that's great. And then the other thing is they don't distinguish between content that's made for the web versus I was on a TV show, or content that's made for print. So I think to reach Gen Y, it's not about putting on a sideways hat and skateboarding into their living room and trying to act like you're one of them. If you're an advisor and you want to reach that group, I think the authenticity will take you a much longer way than the traditional, I hired a publicist or I hired a PR person. So I don't think that people shouldn't try just because it's not their first language to speak with younger people.
Right,
but I think social media helps that. What's that?
I mean, they talk in sound bites.
Yeah,
everything is like 100.
By the way, that's all over. I mean, in 2008, the largest wealth management firms lost the most amount of money. The wirehouses lost $40 billion, one of them, I won't mention. The other one lost $27 billion. The other two went out of business. So now to come on TV and say, oh, and we'll manage your money if you'd like, that's not going to work ever again. So we know that, and all the research says that, you know, the ad where the broker gives a toast at the daughter's wedding has zero impact on the wealth inheritors. So I think to just say, well, I'm not Gen Y, so I shouldn't even try, I think is a mistake. I think anyone, no matter what their age is, can learn to do this the right way, and they don't have to pretend to be something that they're not. I think everyone can be authentic enough and still be compliant and still make an impact in social media.
Yeah, I think, you know, there's having an agency partnership that can help you execute these things and perhaps set strategy and figure out how does this fit into your partner?
That's kind of more like Joanne's firm. I mean, I
yeah,
just
I mean,
think
how
that
does
it
this
makes more
fit
sense for somebody on the conservative side to hire her, or you know, or an independent like myself or whatever, to do that sort of work if you can't talk to the actual client or the potential client.
It's part of your market. It's got to be part of your marketing mix, right? And there's and an expert in that space certainly can help you do that if you don't have, you know, a sort of a native knowledge set around that. You know, we hired an agency, a social agency, to come in and just help us kind of level set and set the foundation and do some internal work around executive support and things like that. But that said, to Josh's point, it doesn't. What I don't want an agency to come in and do is tell me that I need to be someone else I'm not.
Right.
Because that's not going to work. And so that agency needs to come in. The soul of the organization can't change. And if there's people who don't want to do business with you, you were talking about it earlier, because of they don't agree with what you're all about or how you do business, well, that relationship isn't going to work anyway, even if they came to you on false pretenses. So there's absolutely value in getting a partner to come in and help guide you, but your organization, the organization needs to, at some level, embrace this and drive the conversation.
I think an agency is a really great way to break some of those silos, because a truly effective program will be integrated across all the marketing that's going on within the organization. It should tie back to the web and to the social network and the television and print and direct mail and whatever activities, the actual websites of the financial advisors themselves. So an agency could play that role to facilitate collaboration and get the branding cohesive. But in terms of the content, I think that needs to be to the soul of the organization, because every organization is going to have a different set of content based on their clients. You guys are working us hard.
All right. I'm wondering on your thoughts on the potential of proprietary communities. So Josh, you mentioned the risk in having client-to-client communities. But how about communities which engage clients with experts within the firm, or maybe engage different generations of clients with different financial advisors if, you know, the grandkid doesn't want to have the same financial advisor as their grandparent, et cetera. So do you think there's potential for proprietary communities?
I mean, I've not seen it done, so I guess anything's possible. I guess I don't have a strong opinion other than I can only think of the negatives. It's hard for me to see what the positive might be for the reps at the firm and for the firm itself. It's not that there are things that need to be hidden. It's that with financial advisors, because it's such a personal business, and I'm sure Eric can attest to this, everyone's account is different. Everyone's investing toward different goals. And in some years, a conservative account will outperform an aggressive account. Last year is a good example of that. So, but that's something that needs to be explained and iterated on a person-by-person basis, to have those people in a pool somewhere online discussing, you know, my account was up this much, and I think that's really more of I think the negatives outweigh what the potential benefits are, which I can't even think of what they might be. So I guess that's my take, but I suppose somebody could try it.
I think my opinion on it is it's completely business model driven. Completely. It would not work for us.
But however,
that's not how we go to market as an advisory firm. So.
From a different side of the house, I've seen institutional firms set up proprietary communities based on subject and lines of business. Agriculture, technology, where they'll have their subject matter experts who are globally based. They'll do interviews, they'll get on airplanes, and they'll fly around for 3 weeks and shoot videos and create a whole hub, if you will, of proprietary communities. But that's for their institutional clients. So
which I think is a completely different
completely
environment,
different
yeah.
model.
And definitely can see value on
and
that
really
side. We have
useful.
both sides, and I could definitely see application there.
Yeah.
No question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just discovered.